J'Ba Fofi, or the giant or great spider. Their vivid descriptions depicted these spiders as predominantly brown, with a distinctive purple marking on their abdomen.
For centuries, the story of the J'Ba Fofi lingered at the edge of belief.
J'Ba Fofi reports put it at 1.5 meters lifespan. Even the spiderlings are already born quite big, probably bigger than the biggest tarantulas alive today.
Whispered through villages bordering the deepest regions of the Congo Rainforest.
This massive rainforest in the Congo Basin is smaller and less famous than the Amazon. But with 91 billion tons of carbon stored in 2020, or 10 times the annual emissions of the global energy sector.
Elders spoke of a spider so large it could snatch birds from mid-air and drag small antelope into the trees. Hunters claimed entire sections of forest were avoided by animals, as if something above the canopy ruled in silence. Anthropologists cataloged the tale as folklore, a cautionary myth meant to keep children from wandering too far. Biologists dismissed it outright. After all, evolution had limits. There were physical constraints to exoskeleton mass, oxygen diffusion, and joint articulation. A spider the size of a leopard simply could not exist.
J'Ba Fofi is said to be extremely venomous. A bite from it would immediately kill a human. Does this hold any truth? Well, tarantulas have venom.
Then the footage appeared. It surfaced without warning on a local journalist's feed. Shaky, poorly framed, recorded at dusk. The camera panned across a clearing where villagers stood frozen, pointing toward the tree line. Between two massive trunks hung strands of silk so thick they seemed like ropes. Something shifted above. For less than a second, the lens caught a silhouette descending with unnatural smoothness. 8 limbs extended outward, each longer than a man's arm. The video cut abruptly as someone screamed. Within days, the clip was dissected frame by frame across research institutions worldwide. Most called it a fabrication, a clever composite, an elaborate hoax. But a small group of arachnologists hesitated. The limb articulation was accurate. The shadow displacement matched environmental lighting. The silk tension lines bent in ways consistent with weight-bearing load. An expedition was assembled with unusual speed, funded jointly by environmental research foundations and private benefactors eager for the discovery of a lifetime. The team included arachnologists, field biologists, structural engineers, and local trackers who knew the forest intimately. They traveled upriver by boat, then on foot, beneath a canopy so dense it turned daylight into green twilight. At first, they attributed the silence to coincidence, a temporary lull in the constant hum of insects and birds. But as the hours passed, the absence became oppressive. No distant monkey calls, no wing beats overhead. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the leaves. The trackers exchanged uneasy glances, yet said little. They had grown up hearing stories about forbidden sections of forest where even predators refused to hunt. The first web was discovered near a dry riverbed. It stretched across nearly 30 meters between towering hardwood trees, layered in overlapping sheets rather than the delicate radial symmetry common to orb weavers. The silk was pale gray, thick as braided cord.
Spider webs are as diverse in their design as they are effective. Each species has its own set of architectural blueprints.
And when one of the engineers attempted to cut a strand with a field knife, the blade snagged uselessly. It took bolt cutters to sever a single line. The tensile strength readings sent back to their portable lab were staggering, stronger than any known spider silk ever recorded. Beneath the web lay bones. They were scattered in a rough semicircle, bleached and clean. Antelope skull fragments, the rib cage of what might have been a forest hog. Even feathers tangled in residual threads suggested birds had not escaped whatever had constructed this structure. No claw marks indicated a leopard kill, no chew patterns consistent with hyenas. The bones were hollowed with precision, as if liquefied internally before being discarded. They pressed forward. On the third night, something moved above the camp. It began as a faint tremor through the upper branches, a rhythmic vibration that caused dew to fall in sudden showers. One of the biologists aimed a thermal scope upward. The display flickered erratically, then froze. Batteries drained to zero within seconds. Backup units malfunctioned similarly. Static crawled across radio channels, reducing communication to bursts of distorted noise. A drone was launched at dawn. It rose steadily through the canopy gap, propellers whining softly. The camera feed transmitted crisp footage of the forest stretching endlessly in all directions. Then the drone shifted left, responding to manual control, and hovered near a section of interwoven silk partially hidden between branches. The operator zoomed in. The screen filled with texture. Hair. Dense bristles coated a curved surface larger than a truck hood. The drone edged closer. A cluster of eyes reflected the morning light. Not 2, not 8, but dozens arranged in layered arcs. The creature did not lunge. It merely rotated with impossible fluidity, tracking the device's motion. A single foreleg extended, slow and deliberate. The feed ended in static. They recovered the drone wreckage later that afternoon. It had not been crushed. It had been wrapped. Layer upon layer of silk cocooned the frame, immobilizing it completely. Embedded within the silk were fragments of chitinous exoskeletons from smaller insects, as though the web had been used as both trap and reinforcement. That night, one of the team members vanished. There was no scream, no struggle. His tent flap hung open, the zipper partially undone. On the ground outside lay a thin strand of silk, trailing upward into darkness. The trackers refused to follow it. Arguments erupted in hushed but furious tones. Evacuation was urged. The evidence they had gathered already defied scientific precedent. But curiosity and ambition are powerful forces. Confirmation of a species long thought mythical would redefine biological limits. It would secure careers, rewrite textbooks, reshape evolutionary theory. They stayed. 2 days later, they found the nest. It occupied a natural depression between giant buttress roots where filtered sunlight barely touched the ground. Silk formed a dome overhead, dense enough to block debris. Inside were spherical objects arranged in clusters. Each was roughly the size of a melon, semi-translucent, pulsing faintly with internal movement. Eggs, dozens of them. The realization settled heavily. This was not an isolated anomaly. This was a breeding population. A species with infrastructure, territory, and reproductive continuity. As the team documented measurements, one of the eggs quivered violently. The membrane thinned, a shape pressed outward from within. Before anyone could react, the surface split, and a smaller but still grotesquely oversized spider spilled onto the forest floor. Its legs unfurled like collapsing scaffolding snapping into place. Instinct guided it upward immediately, climbing a silk strand toward the canopy with astonishing speed. More eggs began to tremble. Panic finally overpowered professional restraint. Equipment was abandoned in frantic haste. As they retreated, the forest erupted in motion. Web lines dropped from above like snares. One researcher became entangled mid-stride, lifted partially off the ground as silk tightened around his torso. Another hacked desperately with a machete, severing strands before they fully constricted. Then they saw it clearly. The adult descended between trees, filling the space with mass and shadow. Its body spanned nearly 3 meters from leg tip to leg tip. The abdomen glistened darkly, patterned with subtle markings that blended seamlessly into bark and foliage. Each step was eerily silent, cushioned by layered silk that carpeted branches overhead. Mandibles flexed, exuding a viscous fluid that hissed faintly upon contact with leaves. It did not rush, it observed. The team scattered in multiple directions, hoping fragmentation might improve survival odds. Behind them, silk whistled through the air, anchoring to trunks and snapping taut with whip-like precision. One by one, cries echoed, cut short as bodies were lifted or dragged sideways into shadow. Only 3 reached the riverbank extraction point. They did not stop running until the boat engine roared to life and the shoreline receded into distance. Even then, they kept scanning the tree line, half expecting a colossal silhouette to burst forth in pursuit. Weeks later, satellite imaging revealed anomalies across a wide swath of forest. Thermal signatures appeared intermittently along canopy corridors, patterns too symmetrical to be random. Areas of suppressed animal migration coincided precisely with those heat signatures. Drone surveys from high altitude detected reflective silk networks spanning gaps between trees like invisible highways. The surviving researchers submitted their findings to peer review. Initial reactions were disbelief, but the physical samples, silk strands, egg membrane fragments, chemical residue from the venom, underwent independent verification. Molecular analysis confirmed unknown protein configurations in the silk, far exceeding tensile capacities of documented species. Venom composition contained enzymatic structures capable of rapid tissue liquefaction on a scale previously unseen. Reluctantly, cautiously, the scientific community acknowledged what had once been dismissed as folklore. The J'Ba Fofi existed. Debate erupted over its origin. Some proposed evolutionary gigantism sustained by unique atmospheric microclimates within dense rainforest zones. Others theorized undiscovered genetic adaptations allowing enhanced oxygen processing efficiency. A fringe minority whispered of ancient lineages predating known arachnid branches, survivors from eras when Earth's atmosphere favored larger invertebrates. But one detail unsettled everyone. Web samples taken from locations nearly 50 kilometers apart shared identical structural markers, implying coordinated expansion. These were not isolated pockets. They were connected territories. Months after the expedition, reports emerged from neighboring regions. Farmers spoke of livestock disappearing without trace. Bird populations declined sharply along forest perimeters. A cargo helicopter pilot described glinting strands suspended between treetops miles from the original site. The world grappled with a realization long reserved for fiction. There are still dominions on this planet where humanity is not apex. Governments considered containment strategies. Controlled burns were proposed, then rejected due to ecological devastation risk. Chemical deterrents were tested in lab conditions but showed limited efficacy against silk durability. Military involvement was discussed quietly, though deploying force within fragile rainforest ecosystems carried unpredictable consequences. Meanwhile, deep within the canopy, life continued. New webs stretched further each week. Egg clusters matured. Juveniles dispersed, claiming fresh territory with instinctive precision. The forest adjusted around them, predators adapting migration routes, prey patterns shifting under invisible pressure. The surviving expedition members rarely spoke publicly. When they did, their voices carried a tremor not easily dismissed as trauma. They described not just size or aggression, but intelligence, an awareness in those clustered eyes that suggested calculation. One researcher confessed to recurring dreams of silk tightening around his lungs, of watching from below as enormous shapes moved effortlessly overhead. Another admitted that the silence of that forest haunted him more than the attack itself, because silence meant dominance. And somewhere beyond the mapped zones, beyond satellite focus and academic debate, the J'Ba Fofi continued weaving its empire in green shadow. What began as legend had become confirmation. What was once dismissed as impossible had forced science to redraw its boundaries. Yet the most horrifying truth lingered unspoken. If such a creature could remain hidden for centuries within one rainforest, what else might thrive unnoticed in the vast, uncharted spaces of this world? The canopy swayed gently in the evening light, strands of silk catching the sun like threads of glass. High above the forest floor, something shifted, repositioning with patient certainty. The web trembled not with chaos but with order, and the jungle, ancient and watchful, kept its secrets. The official announcement was cautious, almost clinical. The statement avoided the word monster. It avoided the word giant. Instead, it described a previously undocumented megafaunal arachnid species exhibiting extreme structural silk production and advanced predatory behavior. The language was sterile, but the footage released alongside it was not. Stabilized drone reconstruction showed the adult in clearer detail than the original corrupted transmission. Each leg was segmented in reinforced bands, the chitin layered thickly near the joints, as if evolved to withstand enormous stress. Fine sensory hairs lined the limbs, reacting to air displacement in micro-adjustments that suggested a perception system far beyond simple vibration detection. The abdomen pulsed subtly, contracting and expanding in slow rhythm. Its coloration was not uniformly dark as first assumed. Faint patterns rippled across it in muted browns and greens, mimicking lichen and shadow in near-perfect camouflage. Public reaction fractured instantly. Some called it proof that Earth still held wonder. Others saw only threat. Conspiracy forums claimed governments had known for decades. Religious commentators interpreted the discovery through prophecy, but beneath the noise, field reports continued arriving with growing urgency. Logging crews operating legally along the forest edge found machinery immobilized overnight by dense silk cables wrapped around axles and rotors. Attempts to burn the strands resulted in thick, acrid smoke, but minimal structural compromise. In several cases, entire clearings were reclaimed within days by layered webbing, as if the spiders actively repaired disruptions. A second expedition, this one with heavier equipment and remote-operated vehicles, attempted to penetrate deeper than the first. They moved with greater caution, deploying motion sensors and expanding perimeters. The readings were immediate and overwhelming. Vibrational data suggested synchronized movement across large distances. It was not random activity, it was patterned. One of the engineers reviewing live feeds made a quiet observation that sent a chill through the control tent. The webs were not just traps, they formed corridors, elevated pathways spanning kilometers through the canopy, allowing rapid traversal without descending to the forest floor. The spiders were effectively constructing a three-dimensional highway system above human reach. Then came the discovery that altered everything. Acoustic monitors placed overnight captured low-frequency pulses traveling through the silk. At first dismissed as environmental interference, the signals repeated in intervals too regular to ignore. When translated into waveform analysis, they revealed structured sequences, vibrational communication moving across strands like coded messages. The implication was staggering. This was not a solitary predator species operating on instinct alone. It was a network. The second expedition never made physical contact with an adult specimen. Instead, they documented coordinated avoidance behavior. When vehicles approached one sector, thermal signatures dissipated in unison, shifting several kilometers away. Drones sent high into the canopy encountered empty web corridors moments after sensors detected movement. It was as if the spiders anticipated their advance. Then, during a routine perimeter check at dusk, one of the remote vehicles stopped transmitting. The camera feed remained active for several seconds, pointed upward, the screen filled with overlapping strands descending from above in geometric precision. They wrapped around the vehicle's frame, covering the lens gradually until only diffuse light filtered through layers of silk. The feed continued long enough to record faint vibrations traveling across the newly formed cocoon, signals radiating outward. The researchers withdrew. Satellite imaging intensified. Infrared sweeps identified expanding thermal clusters forming a rough crescent shape across hundreds of square kilometers. Wildlife migration patterns altered dramatically, tracked by conservation collars. Entire herds redirected their routes to avoid specific canopy corridors. Bird populations declined sharply in affected zones, with nesting grounds abandoned. And still, no confirmed human fatality beyond the first expedition's losses was officially acknowledged. Governments restricted access to the region under the guise of environmental protection. Airspace was quietly rerouted. Funding poured into biochemical research, analyzing the silk's molecular architecture. The potential industrial applications were revolutionary, if controlled synthesis could be achieved without reliance on the spiders themselves. But control was the central uncertainty. A breakthrough came unexpectedly from one of the surviving researchers who had begun studying archived folklore more closely. Ancient carvings from regional tribes depicted enormous spiders, not merely as predators, but as guardians of boundaries. In some interpretations, they were protectors of sacred forest cores, expanding territory only when balance was disrupted. The carvings showed intricate web patterns resembling maps. Overlaying those carvings with current satellite web distribution produced an unsettling alignment. The crescent formation corresponded closely with zones experiencing the most aggressive deforestation over the past decade. The spiders were not spreading randomly. They were advancing toward disturbance. When this hypothesis was presented publicly, it was met with skepticism, assigning motive to a newly discovered species bordered on anthropomorphism. Yet the data remained consistent. Areas untouched by heavy logging showed minimal web growth. Regions cleared for mining or agriculture experienced accelerated expansion. If the pattern held, human activity itself was guiding their migration. Months passed, the crescent widened, but slowed near protected reserves. International debate intensified over rainforest management policies. Environmental advocates seized upon the discovery as a brutal reminder of ecological consequence. Industry leaders pushed back, arguing correlation did not prove causation. Meanwhile, a quiet event occurred that never reached major headlines. A research satellite conducting high-resolution canopy scans captured an image at dawn. Dozens of adult J'Ba Fofi positioned along a massive central web structure spanning nearly half a kilometer. They were arranged equidistantly, legs touching shared strands. The formation resembled a wheel with multiple hubs. At the center hung a dense silk mass, unlike typical egg clusters. Over several hours, low-frequency vibrations radiated outward from that central node. Thermal readings indicated synchronized metabolic spikes across the network in response. Whatever occurred within that structure triggered rapid territorial reinforcement along its perimeter over the following weeks. Speculation surged about a queen, though arachnid social structures rarely mirrored insect hierarchies. No direct evidence confirmed a singular reproductive monarch, but the scale of coordination suggested at least one central breeding complex of enormous capacity. Then came the first confirmed sighting outside the original forest boundary. A wildlife camera in a neighboring region captured a juvenile specimen crossing a suspended silk bridge over a narrow gorge at night. The timestamp was clear, the coordinates undeniable. It had traveled farther than any recorded movement prior. Containment strategies shifted from localized management to continental monitoring. The surviving members of the first expedition were asked to consult on response planning. Their testimonies carried weight few others could match. One of them, voice steady but eyes distant, offered a perspective that silenced the room. "We keep calling it invasion," he said, "but we went in first." The statement lingered. As rainy season approached, canopy density increased, offering more structural anchor points for silk expansion. Observers noted a subtle change in web architecture, greater vertical layering, as though preparing for increased juvenile dispersal. Egg clusters documented earlier in the year would soon reach maturity. The global scientific community stood at an uneasy crossroads. On one path lay aggressive intervention, chemical dispersal agents, mechanical web destruction, perhaps even targeted incendiary strikes. On the other lay coexistence, boundary recognition, and adaptation of human development patterns to avoid further provocation. Late one evening, as storm clouds rolled over the rainforest, a lightning strike ignited a section of canopy within the crescent zone. Satellite feeds zoomed in automatically, capturing the blaze spreading across treetops. But something unexpected occurred. The fire slowed rapidly upon reaching dense web corridors. Silk blackened yet did not fully disintegrate, collapsing in heavy sheets that smothered smaller flames beneath. Within hours, rainfall extinguished the rest. The spiders had, unintentionally or not, created a firebreak. Days later, regrowth began in the charred zone, protected by residual web structure that shielded saplings from herbivores temporarily displaced by the disturbance. Researchers reviewing the footage hesitated before voicing the thought forming collectively in their minds. The J'Ba Fofi were not simply predators dominating territory. They were engineers reshaping it. The horror of their size remained undeniable, the memory of human loss irreversible. But the narrative shifted subtly from monster to force, an organism responding to environmental pressure with adaptation on a scale rarely witnessed. And still, high above the forest floor, massive forms moved silently across strands invisible to those below. Eggs matured. Juveniles learned the tension signatures of prey. Vibrational pulses traveled through silk highways in patterns too complex to dismiss as random noise. The world had confirmed their existence. What it had not yet confirmed was the limit of their expansion, because beyond the mapped crescent, beyond the satellites and policy debates, untouched rainforests stretched toward distant borders, and somewhere within that endless green expanse, deeper than any expedition had yet dared to travel, the central web pulsed steadily, ancient, deliberate, and very much alive.